What's a horrifying fact that shouldn't be true, but is? Story 1 doctors used to do surgery on babies without anesthesia because they thought they didn't feel pain. My sister once got a tooth pulled without any numbing agent because she was told that applying it was more painful than just pulling the tooth. I'm pretty sure the dentist was deranged, but somehow she got through it. A similar thing happened to my mother. She was terrified of going to the dentist for years. The dentist told her she was exaggerating as she had already given her the shot. She felt everything and was in tears. When she went to a different dentist years later, she let the dentist know she was scared because of what had happened before. They pulled a tooth and she felt nothing. The dentist told her that should have never happened. Feeling pain while your tooth is being pulled is not normal. Apparently, a lot of other people have complained about that dentist. Story 2. Women's survival rate after giving birth almost doubled after doctors started washing their hands before the procedure. 50% of women giving birth died because of that. And they resisted starting to wash their hands even after strong anecdotal and actual evidence came forth that hand washing made a huge difference, mostly because they didn't want to accept that they were doing anything wrong. Funny how some things never change. Story 3. The minute you develop symptoms of rabies, no one can help you anymore. You're going to die a very painful, horrible death. Not a doctor, but if you are exposed, get the vaccine. It is virtually 100% effective and remains effective even if given after the bite. Just don't wait around if you get bitten. Don't put it off. People will scare you with all that 7 shots in the stomach nonsense. That's the old vaccine. The modern one is a few shots in the arm, several days apart. It feels a little sore, but totally not a big deal, especially considering the alternative is almost certainly death. Story 4. In the 1920s, the English archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley was excavating an ancient Mesopotamian cemetery dating approximately 4,500 years ago, when he found a mass grave containing over 70 adults, all arranged in rows, attached to the tomb of an influential woman, queen or priestess. It's been discovered recently that at least most of them were assassinated with a mace-like tool with one large spike driven into the top of the skull. It is believed that these were servants, ritually sacrificed to accompany their masters into the afterlife, although we can't be absolutely sure whether or not they were willing victims. Story 5. In the 1800s, Robert McGee was scalped by Native Americans as a child. His parents had just died, leaving him an orphan. He took a job on a wagon train, which was then attacked by natives, and all the men were killed and scalped. Robert was scalped alive and left for dead. He survived with his skull completely exposed and somehow didn't get an infection. There are pictures online of him taken about 30 years after the incident, where his skull is still exposed. I can't find any info on when he died, but he did live well into adulthood at least into his 40s or early 50s, if not longer. Story 6. If you are a woman and you get into an accident and need CPR, there's a good chance you won't get the help you need because you have breasts, and especially men are afraid to administer CPR to women because they fear they'll be sued for taking the opportunity advantage of the situation to touch their breasts under the guise of performing CPR, chest compressions, so they will hesitate to actually help you. I can believe this. I have done IRL chest compressions, the right kind, where I knew I was going to break their sternum to even have a chance of them being revived. My roommate found our landlord OD'd, but in the shock of it all, it was his childhood friend, didn't get the concept of squishing someone's heart. I'm also a much larger person than he is. In my case, it was a guy, but I can totally see someone on the phone with 911 like I was, unable or not willing to do what they need you to do. To anyone who is reading this, especially if an emergency services operator is telling you to do something, listen to them and do it without hesitating. You can't be sued for rendering aid in an emergency. If you do find yourself ever needing to do emergency chest compressions, you're more than likely going to feel a crack under your palms. This is a good thing for both you and the person you just might save. You have to push hard in regular intervals to the beat of Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. If you're doing them right, you will more than likely break bones, so be ready for that. It's also very physically taxing, so breathe consistently and deeply. It's a marathon, not a sprint. After about a minute, I was breathing like I had just completed 400 meters. Story 7. The more people who are in an area where someone is in need of help, the less likely someone is to report it/offer assistance. With more people around, people have a tendency to think it's someone else's problem instead of helping/doing something about it. This is a story about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have. Story 8. Hitler was reportedly a very charming, charismatic, and good-looking man. I do not say this out of sympathy. I hate their ideology, discrimination, everything about it. I distance myself from such ideology. This was stated by political enemies of Hitler. So communists, social democrats, etc., all said that they liked him and that he was a very charismatic and charming man. Even before he got famous, he was loved by women and was very popular at school. Adding to that, he was very bound to nature, loved animals, drawing, music, and reading. He was very intelligent. To think that such a man would enter politics, one might assume that he would be a very democracy-loving politician, always looking out for the people and showing empathy for political enemies. But no, he started the largest war in history and the largest industrial-based genocide of all times to this day. That is, in my opinion, horrifying. Story 9. If we were to be hit by an EMP or CME, we would never be able to come back from it. Our current level of technological advancements have used up the majority of the surface-level natural resources, and in the event of an EMP or CME, the materials needed to rebuild are buried so deep we would need modern technology to get to them and refine them. And after a CME, that's not possible. So in short, a CME or EMP would knock us back to the 1800s permanently. Story 10. The ultimate genetics red pill is that different races do have varying levels of intelligence and hormone producing, which results in some being better at a certain activity than another or needing different medication for the same illnesses. It's like the biggest taboo in science, and just talking about it could get you fired in certain fields for racism. There were scientists who were studying several observations regarding exposure to parasites, often in warmer climates, closer to the equator, and a lack of allergies. Populations farther away from the equator where it gets cold, and many parasites die off from the freezing cold of winter, subsequently tend to have more reports of allergies. The scientists ended up finding a correlation between how the body fights parasites and how that affects histamine reactions. However, they started making other observations when studying populations in regards to proximity to the equator and ended up dancing around some of them because they didn't want things to be misconstrued as some pro-eugenics racist bullcrap, especially considering the parasite histamine reaction thing is really fascinating and might be able to help people with debilitating allergy. Story 11. We are momentary specks within an indifferent universe, and you should spend your time doing something good that you are proud of. I think the quote came from Dr. Strange. I was watching that a couple nights ago. It sounds like a paraphrasing of Carl Sagan's pale blue dot. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species live there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph, they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Story 12. Human zoos were a thing until the 1900s something. I think 40 years. There was an Aztec ritual sacrifice that targeted kids. I think it was to get rain. Thing is, the god needed the tears. So if the kid didn't cry because of the knives, the priests would slowing take their nails out and start doing various cuts and other wounds to inflict pain. Since a few gens ago, humans started getting plastic in their DNA. Almost everything in your house, pockets, or clothing had to go through slave labor, one way or another. During Chile's dictatorship, there was a woman that ordered exploiting on prisoners. These included being abused by dogs, forcing kids to exploit their mothers, or vice versa, along other sick stuff. I think there is a short movie about that. Story 13. South Korea still has the death penalty in the books. Yes, just like Japan. The method is by hangings. When you compare that to North Korea, that's whether it's humane when one thinks about it. Yet South Korea has carried out the death penalty for more than a decade, despite having people on death row. In case you're asking, the death penalty is still surprisingly supported in South Korea, about 80% according to one study. However, if an alternative can be found and legalized, then upwards of 70% of the population are willing to give up the death penalty. Japan also has a death penalty, of course, and it's by hanging. Yet, landing on death row in Japan is surprisingly more challenging than in the US. This is thanks to a list of criterias that must be met in order to even allow the option. This can include if the family of the victim is willing to forgive, history of prior offenses, or how serious it was. Plus, it could take a long time for the sentence to be carried out, since the condemned aren't given a specific death date. So, keep in mind, the mastermind of the sarin gas attack back in 1995 wasn't executed until pretty much in 2018. If you think he would have been spared because he was blind, think again, although they will spare anybody with a cognitive disability. Story 14. I work on a remote mine site in the northwest of Australia. It's so remote, we fly 2 hours from the capital city to an airstrip owned and operated by the company. Anyways, during a quarterly review meeting, the mine's general manager says, to about 40 of us. During the life of the mine, 30 years or so, statistically speaking, we will have one plane crash. I wish I could unlearn that one. If you believe air crash investigators, over 50% of plane crashes occur during takeoff and landing. Look at the following link and tell me what you see. I see little canyons on both sides, and there's no flat land as far as the eye can see. The map really doesn't do it justice. Story 15. There is a microorganism, globally spread, but especially in warm, fresh water in the American Southeast, which swims up your nose and attacks your brain and spinal fluid. You present at first with cold symptoms. From that point, you have about a week to correctly diagnose it, which requires a spinal tap before you paralyze and die. Oh, and there's no FDA-approved treatment. Mortality is approximately 95%. We actually managed to cure a girl of this at Arkansas Children's Hospital last year. She's only one of 3 people known to survive, I believe. Of course, the fact that I used to go to the water park where she became infected with the damn thing is a bit unnerving. Story 16. Heard this ultra-terrifying day wrecker from a philosophy guy who works in brain surgery. It simply deals with understanding facts we already know, but that humans have generally not understood the implications of, and it is this, that thoughts arise from electrical activity in the brain. Think about it. Once your physical brain is dead, there is simply nothing left to create thoughts. Mind arises from highly complex electrical and chemical processes, and science has never identified even hints of a realm beyond ours, or signs the brain receives information from any outside sources. The idea of a soul and afterlife was debatable until modern neuroscience. While we don't understand a lot about mind, though read the famous scientist Daniel Dennett for a reconsidering of how much we do know about consciousness and books full of matrix-level mind-blowns, we certainly have to go beyond the pale to imagine how or why our existence in anything like this form could exist after the brain does not exist. Happy to debate these points with anyone who is somewhat sane, but if you have to bring religion into it, please at least consider conceding my point that it is sort of nuts to believe we have thoughts of any kind after death. No one seems to believe we sneeze after death, and that too is a biologically based process. Story 17. My best friend's mother told me this story about how some little girl was so excited to meet this very old golden retriever. She took it on a very long walk, exhausting the dog to the point that when it got back, then it lay down in its bed and died. I have never wanted to slap a woman so hard before. I could have lived a completely happy life never knowing this thing, and it will haunt me forever. I don't know what's worse, the trauma it must have caused the kid or the trauma it's causing me. owing to my love of dogs. Story 1843% of people in the USA think the Earth is just 6,000 years old, when in fact, it's about 4.5 billion years old. They believe this idiocy, despite knowing it doesn't even say it in the Bible. It fits what they want to believe, so they ignore both the science and the actual text of the Bible. These people all vote, versus a 17% rate for the country, and they vote exactly how their church tells them to. They are the people who gave the GOP its recent majority advantage in Congress. Pray for the future of America. Pray hard. Story 19. Memories are subject to change. You can even convince yourself that a story you heard is an actual memory of yours. I just wish my life was based on something more solid than that. Dude, it's scary how ridiculously malleable our memories are. It's one of the few reasons I can think of to keep a journal every day. I've thought about doing this since I tend to get anxious and feel guilty easily. If I wrote down what I was thinking each time I did something, if it goes wrong or hurts someone's feelings later, I can revisit my thought process so I can remind myself I'm not a total douche. They say if you tell a story to someone 3 times and tell them that it happened and they were there with you, the 4th time you talk about it, they will usually remember it too. It has to be interesting enough that it was worth remembering, but not so crazy as to be unbelievable. Story 20. Prions, the proteins that cause brain-wasting diseases like CJD, mad cow, are extremely resistant to all forms of disinfection. Conventional cooking methods don't even come close to being effective. Infected mouse brain samples were subjected to hours of 600-degree Fahrenheit heat, and later, after their ashes were rehydrated, infectious prions were still detectable in many samples. Only in the instances where the temperatures used were over 1,000 degrees, were the prions effectively neutralized. Oh, and if they are heated while touching glass or metal, they can heat bond to the material and gain even more thermal resistance. Story 21. Air embolism. The fact that injecting air into your bloodstream can kill you. I have to get medicine pumped into me by IV regularly, so I'm used to it now. But when I first started going to get, there would be pretty big air bubbles slowly getting closer and closer to injecting in my veins. Every time I would brace myself and be like, this is it for me. My heart's going to stop and I'm going to die. Once in a while, there's an air bubble, maybe a foot long in the tubes. The first time I yelled for the nurse and she told me to chill out that your blood is mostly air anyway. You'd have to basically hook your IV up to an air pump for it to do damage. Plus, if air bubbles could kill you, there wouldn't be a junkie alive. Story 22. The Fermi Paradox. Our planet has been around for roughly 4.5 billion years. In that span of time, Earth has gone from a complete lack of life to the society that exists today, and presumably, in the near future, will be expanding outwards from Earth. Life grows and expands at an exponential rate. It's estimated that the Sun is a 3rd-generation star, meaning that 2 generations of stars have been created, burned through their nuclear fuel, and died out. The lifetime of our star is only slightly longer than that of Earth, a few tens of millions of years. If it only took life 4.5 billion years, from formation to space travel, and the universe has been around for 2 to 5 billion year generations. In reality, it's estimated at 13.7 billion. Then life that began forming near the start of the universe, or within the next few billion years, would likely have attained space travel by now. The universe is really, really big. Bigger than most people can even wrap their heads around. Big enough that we can assume that life exists somewhere else. So, given that A, life exists somewhere in the galaxy, and B, it has attained the ability to travel through space by now, and C, life expands incredibly quickly, then by all accounts we should have found overwhelming evidence of its existence by now. Our galaxy should be absolutely teeming with life, just as it appears to in so many science fiction movies. So, where is it? Story 23. Weed is not all sunshine and roses and fantasy. It's more than a medicine. It's an intoxicant. If you smoke every day, you'll stop living a real life. Honestly, it's a mild sedative that takes all the bad emotions away. It makes you happy even when your life around you falls apart. Do not smoke every day. You will not want to come down. Coming down will feel like crashing, burning, breaking. When it wears off, the bad emotions come out of hiding and ambush you. I'm a member of R Leaves, by the way. The herb has ruined my life. The high feels awful and the low feels worse. The cravings are a huge problem, and knowing what's waiting for me at the bottom of this high is terrifying me right now. For your benefit, from my wisdom, know that it is possible to get so high that the only way to feel happy is to never get high again. Even people who break bones aren't supposed to take painkillers every day. Eventually, they have to stop. More than a few weeks, and you have a habit coupling with early addiction. Weed is sort of like painkillers. Use it for a little bit, but always come back down and spend the following day sober or it'll be too easy to sink into an everyday habit. It is going to be so important in the coming years to educate each other about the dangers of forming habits with weed. Story 24. How many rocks there are out there with a really low albedo, just waiting to smack into our little blue planet. Right now, it'd be a game over scenario if it were big enough. We just don't have the off-the-shelf tech to send Bruce Willis and Aerosmith up, or the detection capability to catch an asteroid far enough out to divert its orbit. Also, gamma rays burst. Far less likely, yes. But interstellar instant death moving at 99% of light speed can happen at any instant, and we literally would not feel a thing. We, being all life on the planet, even the cockroaches. To be more general, pretty much any imaginable black swan event